friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today I am here to talk to you about all of the books that I read in the month of July. So you guys have probably seen my TBR takeover video that I posted this week, where my good friend Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads had full control of my TBR for a couple weeks this month, and he picked out 3 books for me to read. You can go watch the vlog up there. I had a fantastic time reading. It got a little wild, as life tends to do in the summer, but it was really fun. So the first book I finished this month actually wasn't until, I think, July 5th, 16th or 17th maybe. I had read about half of one of my other reads this month at the very beginning of July, but it took me until the 17th to even finish one, which is very weird for me, but I was kind of in a reading slump and I was struggling a little bit, so we finally made it through thanks to Andrew's help. And the first book that I finished in July was Lord of a Shattered Land by Howard Andrew Jones. This has a very classic sword and sorcery vibe, but it was written, I think it came out not very long ago, actually. I think it was like 2023. So this is a very actually modern classic sword and sorcery vibe. And it follows Hanavar, who is a grizzled war veteran whose entire nation has been decimated by their enemies, and he happened to survive. And so he is basically on a quest to find and free all of the remaining survivors of his people. And each chapter is its own story, so it's kind of like a collection of linear short stories as Hanavar is going to different places and trying to free different parts of his people. It's really good. I really enjoyed this book. It's a great action adventure, but you get some good character moments in here, and each chapter has a very different vibe. So we had one that was almost like a horror escape room story. We had one that was just very classic, like action adventure, fight in the arena kind of thing. Like there's a whole bunch of different stories within this, which I really appreciated. It didn't feel the same every chapter. It felt like each adventure, if you want to put it that way, was very unique and well thought out, and I really enjoyed it. So highly recommend this one. I think I will probably continue the series. I know there are 2 more books in it currently. And I'm interested in reading more. I think Hanavar is a really cool character because it's kind of taking the veteran mentor character and making him the protagonist, which I always love. So that was a fantastic read to kick off my TBR takeover. The second one that Andrew had me read was Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. The only Bradbury I'd read up to this point was Fahrenheit 451, and I gotta be honest, you guys, it wasn't for me. I wasn't a big fan. I know a lot of people love that book, but I just wasn't a big fan. And I actually liked Dandelion Wine, I think, better than 451 because it's, at the core, it has a breath of magical realism to it, but it's really about the magic of a childhood summer as told from the perspectives primarily of Douglas and Tom Spaulding, who are young brothers. I think Douglas is like 8 or 9. They're in this small town, and you get stories from a whole bunch of different people in the town, and it always comes back to Doug and Tom talking about what had happened if they're not the protagonists of the story. And it's kind of a jury-rigged collection of things, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I loved the small town childhood nostalgia in this book. There were a few stories that really pulled me out of the suspension of disbelief with the collection as a whole. But overall, I think I enjoyed this more than I was expecting to, if I'm being totally honest, and I enjoyed it more than Fahrenheit 451, which also kind of surprised me. So that was my second read in the TBR takeover. The last one I binged in, I think, less than 2 days, and that was Day Zero by C. Robert Cargill. This is the story of a AI anthropomorphic tiger nanny named Pounce, who was purchased to take care of a little boy named Ezra. And his parents are very involved. They have this little family together. They have like a domestic house servant robot also that's part of their little family. And everything is going fantastic until the world ends, and there is a massive robot revolution that happens. And Pounce is faced with an impossible choice of whether or not he is going to join the robots and fight for his freedom, or if he's going to stay with Ezra, the little boy, and save him from the horrors that wait outside. There's a lot of moral and ethical questions that come up in this book, as you probably would imagine, but I think my favorite part of it were the questions and the moments that came out of the relationship between Pounce and the little boy Ezra. How far would you go for someone you love, and how do you, like, what is love? You know, what constitutes love? Because Pounce is struggling with that. As an AI, is he, you know, is he struggling with whether or not to protect Ezra because he actually loves him, or is it because he's programmed to love? You know what I mean? And I thought that was a very interesting twist on it. I didn't love the political backdrop to this story, which doesn't take a huge amount of space other than in the first part of the book, was way too close to modern day just everything for me, and I tend to really pull away from that in my reads just because I live in it every day and I don't really love reading about it in my books. And I liked Pounce's character a lot, but I didn't really understand throughout the entire book. It just felt like I was reading a 21st century human character, you know, and that kind of bothered me because I was like, I want something unique. I want him to feel a little different somehow. I want that tiger aspect to be brought in more. And that really was never there for me in the book. I enjoyed a lot of the other aspects of it, but that was something that I really felt was underdeveloped or missing in terms of characterization. But that was a bingeable read, especially the final bit of this book. Like, the last third of this book was so intense and I could not put it down. So it is an incredibly bingeable read, very easy prose, and some pretty hard-hitting character moments, which I appreciated. And that was the end of my TBR takeover with Andrew. And I gotta really say a big thank you again to Andrew for helping me get out of a reading slump, because once I finished those 3 books, I felt a lot more immersed in my reads, and I just was excited about pulling something off the shelf again and finishing some books that I had put down before that. So it was good to just kind of shake things up a little bit this month, and I do intend to continue doing TBR takeovers through the rest of the year, so keep an eye out for that. But I finally finished my June Cosmic Footsteps read, which is my kind of on-again, off-again book club this year, where I've been focusing on reading classic sci-fi and fantasy written by female writers. And I finished The Tales of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. This was my first time ever reading Le Guin, and I know that she is an incredibly beloved author by so many people here on BookTube. The thing for me with this, and I kind of knew this going into it, this is a very plot and world-driven story, in my opinion. And that's cool, and I think that she's amazing at it. I do really like that. I think she's a fantastic classic fantasy author. But for the personal reading experience, it just never went further than surface level for me. Because I didn't feel like Ged, our protagonist, was a particularly, like, I wasn't let in, if that makes sense. It was just kind of surface level. He's doing this thing, he's on this quest, and here's the things. And that's very much in the style of this time period, and that's fine. It just, for me personally, was a harder book to read just because I wasn't as immersed in the character as I like to be. As a character-driven reader, like, to the 100%. So I felt like I didn't immerse with the characters very well, and it was a little bit more of a chore to get through the story because of that. However, I do think that Le Guin is a really interesting writer. I thought that the concepts that she was playing with within this kind of classic fantasy setting was really cool, and I really liked the world building aspects. It's clear that Le Guin really puts a lot of time into her world building, which is awesome, and it felt very fleshed out and nuanced and interesting. So that was my Cosmic Footsteps read for June, which I finished in July, but that's okay. We're just we're reading as many of them as we can this year, and I think that's my 5th or 6th Cosmic Footsteps read this year, so I feel pretty good about that. Next was the Chonk. This is the Chonk that I finished in July, and this was the one I actually started pretty early on in the month. When I was on vacation over July 4th, I started reading this book, and I got about halfway through, and I had to put it down because of some of the content, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I did end up going back here at the end of the month to finish it, and that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This is lauded as like one of the best classic Western novels ever written, and I completely understand why. It has the feel almost of a super character-driven epic fantasy vibe. It is grimdark. And I'm just going to say that right now. For anybody that thinks that grimdark is a subgenre only of fantasy, I disagree, because this is grimdark Western. This is such grimdark Western. So if you enjoy, you know, the kind of Game of Thrones vibe to your world in a story, Lonesome Dove is definitely along that line. The characterization is so good, and I think that's one of the reasons why this book has had so many accolades. To be perfectly honest with you guys, treatment of women in this story is so bleak, and the whole story is so nihilistic and bleak. It was taking a lot out of me to read, which is why I'm glad I put it down for a while, and especially the treatment of women in this book is just... like, I was so over it. And there's so much sexual violence in this book. For anybody that's concerned about that, please be aware it is all over in this book, and the focus on so many of the characters in the story either being in love with, pining after, looking forward to, reminiscing about, or actually doing the deed with horrors in this novel is just like, I was over it. I finally got to a point where I was like, the part of the story that I really, really love, the motley crew, the cattle drive, the Western survival kind of aspect of this story, was such a backseat for so much of this book to all of that, that I almost DNF'd the book halfway through, but I'd read 450 pages of it, and I'm a stubborn person, so I was like, you know what, dang it, I'm gonna finish this book. And I had seen the TV series years and years and years ago, so I knew what happened. I know all of the deaths in the story. It wasn't a surprise when any of those things happened, because I had seen the story. I did get a little emotional at the end in a couple of spots, but overall, I can see why this is considered a classic Western, but at the same time, I just feel like for me, the focus in this book was on a lot of the things that I didn't particularly want to read. And I thought that a lot of the aspects of it that I loved, I would have liked more of. Last but certainly not least, was a book I actually finished last night, and I love survivor memoirs. That's something that I'm going to be doing a video on here fairly soon, because I love reading the stories of people who have overcome and survived really, really, really hard things. And I had heard about this book and been interested in reading it for quite a while, and I finally got my copy of it and decided to read it here at the end of the month. And that is Night by Eli Wiesel. And as you can see, it is a tiny, tiny memoir. I know a lot of people, this was required reading in somewhere along your education line. When it's a memoir like this, it's always hard to know what to say. And I feel like I don't even consider myself reviewing memoirs like this, because it's somebody's life story, and I don't feel right saying I'm reviewing this book, right? Because it's their life story and they own it, and that's a really hard thing to have any kind of objectivity about. In the preface, the author talks about how he didn't want any extra details, and that's a really great way of explaining how this book is written. There's no sensationalized anything in this story. It is just the bleak, direct view of a young teenage boy surviving the concentration camps of the Holocaust. As you might imagine, I feel like this is just kind of a given. It is an incredibly impactful book for the short amount of pages that it utilizes. And one of the things that I really appreciated about this book is the story of how deeply Eli questioned and struggled with faith during what he endured in the concentration camps. I feel like that's such an important topic, and I feel like so many people talk about the miracle of surviving something like that, and that's also important. But I really love that he did not shy away from the hard moments of struggling with and trying to reject his faith in the face of all of this horrific, awful experience. The inclusion at the very end of his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech and who he became as an older man after having experienced all of these horrors. Such a powerful journey in and of itself, and as a person of faith, I really respected how deeply he allowed that aspect of it to be a part of this memoir. For anybody that hasn't read this yet, who is interested in any aspect in memoirs from this time period, highly recommend this. It's a very fast read, but one that will stick with you in the way that it just very directly and unapologetically gives you the insight, the window into the horrific experiences that people like Wiesel went through. That is my stack of books for July, and considering I wasn't sure I was even gonna finish one in July, I feel pretty darn good about this stack. Came through a reading slump. I've been working really hard on writing my book, Cold Silver for Souls, which, as I mentioned on my community post recently, I don't know how consistent the videos are going to be going forward here, as I'm really trying to focus on writing, and it is hard to do reading and writing at the same time. So that is my update for July. I hope you guys also had a fantastic July of reading. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite read of the month was, or just let me know what you read in general. And I hope that you are having a fantastic week. I hope you're reading some 5-star reads, and I'll see you in the next video.